Princess Elira of the Viorlian Empire had always felt like an object, a decoration in the vast, glittering halls of her people's palace, rather than a living being. Her violet-tinted skin, the rarest among her species, was meant to signify power, beauty, and intelligence, but for Elira it had become a curse. From the moment her inability to conceive was discovered, whispers and judgment followed her like shadows, twisting every smile into suspicion. Among her people, the ability to bear children was not just a privilege. It was the measure of worth, the definition of royalty. To fail at it was to fail at life itself, or so the Empire insisted. Elira had spent years of her life hiding in corners of her palace, avoiding conversations, avoiding the public eye, and trying desperately not to be reminded of what she lacked. Her daily life was a mixture of ceremonial appearances and tedious lessons. Tutors explained politics she would never truly control. Advisors reminded her that her time was ticking, and distant relatives watched for any sign of weakness they could exploit. Even her father, the Emperor, tried to show love, though it was buried under layers of expectation. Elira felt trapped in a life dictated by appearances and tradition, where her worth was measured in heirs, not intellect, not kindness, not bravery. It was during the Galactic Council's festival, an annual event where representatives of every major world and faction gathered, that her life began to change. Elira had been dressed in a gown that glimmered with the light of 10 moons, her hair carefully styled according to ancient rituals, and yet she felt more like a display than a participant. Nobles and diplomats moved around her, exchanging compliments and veiled insults in equal measure. She listened as whispers swirled around her. Some called her unfortunate, others referred to her as the princess who cannot continue the bloodline. Then came the suggestion, spoken in a tone that masqueraded as a joke. One of the older alien lords leaned toward another and said, "Perhaps we should send Elira to a primitive world. Let the humans have her for fun. Maybe they will teach her how to live without producing heirs." The words were cruel, but they carried the weight of decision-making. Among the Viorlians, humor often concealed authority, and in the laughter of the council, a decree had already taken shape. Elira was stunned. She had anticipated exile, perhaps a political arrangement, but never such casual dismissal. Within days, preparations began. A spacecraft was sent to take her away, and Elira was ordered to leave her home planet for Earth, a minor human world. No explanation, no ceremony, only the polite words of officials assuring her that she would be better occupied among humans. When Elira arrived on Earth, she found herself in the home of a human named Daniel Reyes. Daniel was an engineer, a man of simple means but extraordinary patience. His home was modest, cluttered with tools, machinery, and half-finished inventions that reflected the human spirit of trial, error, and curiosity. He did not look at her with awe, nor did he treat her like royalty or a science experiment. He treated her like a guest, respectful, cautious, yet entirely genuine. At first, Elira was suspicious. Could humans be trusted? Was this another trick of the Viorlian Empire to humiliate her further? Yet, as she observed Daniel, she noticed something she had never seen in her own people: warmth. His attention was focused not on what she lacked, but on what she could contribute. He encouraged her curiosity, answered her questions honestly, and treated her mistakes with patience rather than derision. The days that followed were a mixture of mundane work and small moments of discovery. Elira helped Daniel repair spacecraft and study old technologies left by humans who had once dreamed of exploring the stars. Humans were different from Viorlians in ways she had never imagined. They laughed at mistakes, spoke openly, and seemed to value effort as much as outcome. The rigidity of her former life, the endless etiquette, the political posturing, the constant judgment, faded in the glow of this strange, living world. Yet even amidst this newfound freedom, Elira could not escape her past. News from her home planet followed her like a shadow. Galactic broadcasts carried whispers of her assignment among humans. Many nobles mocked the choice, claiming it proved her uselessness, while a few others expressed pity. But humans had a different perspective. To Daniel and the scientists he knew, Elira was not broken. She was a mystery, a fascinating being whose biology, culture, and intelligence offered new paths to understanding. Late one evening, Elira found herself on a small hill overlooking the human city, the stars shining brighter here than on her homeworld. She confessed her fear to Daniel, not of the Empire, not of exile, but of herself. "I am worthless," she said softly, almost afraid the wind would carry her shame across the cosmos. "I am a failure. Everything I have been told says so." Daniel looked at her calmly, his voice firm but kind. "Maybe your people have been wrong. Maybe the measure of a person isn't what they can give to a bloodline, but what they can give to the world around them." His words struck her deeply. For the first time, Elira considered the possibility that she could define her own worth, that she could exist outside the narrow definitions imposed by her culture. That night, for the first time in her life, she felt hope instead of fear. Over the weeks, she and Daniel worked together to explore her Virelian biology. She had always believed herself infertile, the doctors and the nobles' whispers confirming it relentlessly. But the humans approached science differently. They asked questions without assumptions. They tested environments, conditions, and possibilities without bias. Elira began to realize that the conclusion she had accepted as absolute might, in fact, be incomplete. As she grew accustomed to Earth, she also grew accustomed to Daniel. Their conversations ranged from engineering to philosophy to the strange customs of Virelian and human societies. Daniel treated her opinions with respect, even when he disagreed, and never once belittled her for her lack of experience with humans. Slowly, Elira found herself laughing, not just politely but freely. She began to see herself as capable, not just as a princess defined by failure, but as an individual whose life could be meaningful. Yet the Empire's shadow remained. News from Virelian officials reminded her that she was a pawn, sent to a minor world for the amusement of humans and the distraction of rivals. But each day on Earth reinforced the lesson that had begun to take root. Her value was not dictated by the bloodline or by tradition, but by her actions, her mind, and the relationships she chose to nurture. One day, as she and Daniel repaired a partially damaged starship engine, Elira paused and considered the possibility that perhaps she could contribute more than her people ever allowed her. Perhaps her life did not have to be constrained by shame and judgment. The humans around her were proof that adaptability, courage, and kindness could reshape a world, and perhaps even an empire. By the end of her first months on Earth, Elira no longer felt like an exile or a curiosity. She was learning, creating, exploring, and most importantly, thinking for herself. She began keeping a journal, recording observations about human culture, their technology, and her own thoughts about what it meant to be alive. Each entry strengthened her confidence, revealing a side of herself that had been suppressed by centuries of expectation. She also began to notice subtle changes within her body. What she had always assumed to be an unchangeable condition, her inability to conceive, seemed different in the Earth environment. Perhaps it was the air, the food, the gravity, or some other factor she could not yet understand. Yet the mere possibility that her infertility might not be absolute filled her with a mixture of awe and cautious hope. As part of the scientific work, Daniel introduced her to human medical researchers, who approached her biology with curiosity rather than judgment. Tests and analyses revealed that Virelian doctors had only examined her within the constraints of their empire's environment. Earth provided a new set of conditions, revealing potential that had been ignored or overlooked. Elira felt a quiet thrill. Could it be that everything her life had been built around, the fear, the shame, the exile, had been based on ignorance? That evening, Elira stood alone on the balcony of Daniel's home, looking at Earth's twin moons casting silver light over the city. She realized that her life was no longer just a product of the Virelian Empire's rules. It was her own life, filled with possibility, questions, and choices. She felt for the first time in her existence that she was capable of shaping her own destiny. And so the princess who had been sent away for fun, who had been considered broken and worthless, began a journey not just of survival, but of discovery, hope, and unexpected empowerment. Months passed on Earth, and Elira's life began to feel more like her own than it ever had. On her home planet, the Virelian palace, with its endless corridors, ceremonial halls, and whispers of judgment, felt like a distant memory, a place she had left behind but could never fully forget. Daniel continued to guide her through the strange ways of humans, and she, in turn, shared knowledge of Virelian science, history, and culture. Their collaboration became a kind of daily ritual. Mornings spent repairing spacecraft, afternoons studying alien biology, evenings walking through forests or cities to observe life on a planet that was both familiar and alien to her senses. Elira's curiosity grew each day. She had once thought she understood the universe from the teachings of Viorlian tutors, but Earth taught her a different kind of intelligence. Humans did not seek perfection. They experimented, failed, and tried again. They valued creativity, adaptability, and courage. Daniel's patience and kindness were not exceptions, but reflections of a species that found strength in imperfection. Elira felt her mind opening to possibilities she had never considered. She could explore, invent, and learn without the suffocating weight of judgment. One day, Daniel brought a group of human scientists to his home. They were intrigued by Elira, not because she was a princess, but because she was an unknown species with a unique physiology. They asked questions, conducted tests, and observed her with care, always mindful of her comfort. Elira, initially wary, found herself enjoying the process. The scientists treated her as an intelligent collaborator rather than an object to be studied. They listened to her ideas, corrected misconceptions without condescension, and shared insights freely. She began to see that her infertility might not be an absolute fact, just a conclusion drawn from limited knowledge. Elira spent hours examining her own biology alongside the humans, comparing Viorlian and human systems. She discovered that the conditions on Earth, gravity, atmosphere, nutrition, seemed to stimulate her body in ways impossible on Viorlian space. Where she had once been labeled broken, she now noticed subtle signs of growth and potential. Her heart raced with hope, but caution remained. She had been disappointed too many times by assumptions and misdiagnoses to trust her instincts fully. Still, the thought that she might be capable of bearing life was exhilarating. Daniel noticed the change in her and said, "Sometimes, it's not that you cannot do something, it's that you've never been given the right environment to try." His words resonated deeply with Elira. On Viorlia, everything had been controlled: diet, exercise, interactions, even her thoughts. On Earth, freedom itself had become a form of medicine, a catalyst for her body and mind. As weeks turned into months, Elira and Daniel's relationship deepened. They spoke of dreams, fears, and philosophies. Elira admitted that she had never truly been allowed to explore her own potential before. Daniel shared stories of humans who had faced limitations and found ways to overcome them. Through their conversations, Elira began to understand not only human resilience, but also her own. She realized that her value did not depend on the approval of Viorlians or the continuation of a bloodline. Her life was hers to live, and perhaps even hers to change the destiny of her people. One evening, while walking through the city after a long day of experiments, Elira stumbled upon a street festival. Music echoed from nearby stalls, children laughed, and vendors called out their wares. Humans interacted with one another openly, without concern for rank or title. Elira felt a pang of envy at their freedom, but it was not a longing for what she had lost. Instead, it was an excitement for what she could now experience. Daniel smiled at her, noticing her gaze, and took her hand. "You belong here as much as they do," he said softly. "You don't have to be someone else's idea of perfect, you just have to be you." That night, Elira lay awake, reflecting on her life. She thought of the palace, the whispers, the humiliations, and the exile that had brought her here. And she realized that each trial, each hardship had prepared her to understand herself. In Daniel's presence, among humans who valued action over appearance, she felt capable, strong, and alive. Then came the moment that changed everything. A subtle shift in her body hinted that the rumors of infertility were false. She felt signs that had never appeared on Viorlia. Her heart raced, her mind filled with wonder and fear. Could it be that humans, in their simplicity and curiosity, had unlocked what her own culture had deemed impossible? Elira did not speak of it immediately. She wanted certainty before confronting the implications. Over the following weeks, careful observation confirmed what she had suspected. Her body was responding, adapting to Earth's environment in a way that made pregnancy possible. The discovery filled her with a mix of joy, fear, and determination. She had once believed herself useless, defined solely by failure. Now, she realized that not only was she capable, but she might also carry the first truly unexpected bridge between two species. As the news of her potential pregnancy began to circulate among the humans she worked with, reactions varied. Some were excited by the scientific implications, others cautious, and a few skeptical. Elira met all inquiries with dignity, asserting her autonomy over her body and choices. She had spent years being defined by the judgments of others, and now she refused to be reduced to a subject of speculation. Meanwhile, Viorlian politics grew tense. Rumors of her condition spread across the empire, sparking fear among rival nobles. They questioned the emperor's judgment in sending her to a human world. Some accused humans of tampering with the princess, of experimenting on her body to produce results for unknown purposes. Others were awed and fearful, unable to comprehend that the infertile princess could defy expectations. Elira watched the ripple of her presence through the empire, feeling neither pride nor fear. Her concern was her own life, her own choices, and the child she might carry. Daniel stood by her throughout these developments, providing guidance and reassurance. He reminded her that she had agency, that she could navigate the complexities of interstellar politics without losing herself. Elira valued his counsel, but she also recognized that the decisions were hers alone. For the first time, she understood that power did not always come from title or rank. Sometimes it came from understanding oneself and choosing one's path. As her pregnancy progressed, Elira began preparing for a return to her homeworld. She did not anticipate a warm welcome. Many nobles had plotted to see her fail, to use her return as proof of weakness or to challenge her father's authority. The emperor himself had sent messages, requesting her immediate presence, citing concerns for her safety and the legitimacy of the heir. Elira considered these requests carefully. She knew that she could not avoid her past forever, but she also knew that she could face it on her own terms. Before her departure, Elira made final preparations in Daniel's home. She organized her research, ensuring that the scientific knowledge she had gathered would benefit both species. She recorded detailed notes on the interactions between Viorlian and human physiology, as well as her own observations on adaptation and growth. Each entry reinforced her confidence and sense of purpose. She realized that her experiences on Earth were not only personal milestones, but could also influence the future of interstellar relations. The day of her departure arrived. Elira stood at the airlock of Daniel's workshop, looking back at the planet that had given her freedom, understanding, and the possibility of life. She felt gratitude for the humans who had treated her with respect, curiosity, and kindness. She felt gratitude for Daniel, whose companionship had taught her to trust and to hope. And she felt hope for herself, for the child growing within her, and for the chance to change the perceptions of an entire empire. When she arrived on Violia, the palace loomed like a shadow of her past. The corridors seemed narrower, the ceilings lower, the atmosphere heavier than she remembered. Nobles glanced at her with curiosity and veiled hostility. She could sense their calculations, their questions, and their doubts. Elira moved with confidence. She was no longer the timid, uncertain princess who had arrived on Earth months before. She was a woman who had discovered her own potential, who had challenged the assumptions of her people, and who carried the possibility of life that defied expectations. The first public appearance was tense. Courtiers and diplomats gathered, whispering, staring, and calculating. Elira entered with dignity, her posture straight, her gaze steady. When the news of her pregnancy became clear, reactions were immediate and explosive. Some nobles gasped in disbelief. Others whispered of scandal, manipulation, or miracle. The emperor, observing from his throne, remained silent, his expression unreadable. Elira knew that she had their attention, but she also knew that attention did not guarantee acceptance. She addressed the council, speaking with calm and authority. She reminded them that her life and choices were her own, that human and Viorlian knowledge could coexist, and that the potential for life was not a matter of tradition or politics, but of understanding and opportunity. Her words resonated in ways she had not anticipated. Some citizens nodded in agreement, others looked skeptical, but the message was clear. Elira was no longer defined by assumptions or shame. She was defined by her actions, knowledge, and courage. In private moments, Elira reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the isolation, the judgment, the exile, and the fear that had once dominated her life. She remembered Daniel's guidance, the scientist's curiosity, and the freedom she had experienced on Earth. And she felt gratitude, not for what she had gained, but for the knowledge that she could overcome, adapt, and grow. The princess who had been discarded for fun was no longer a pawn. She was a force of change, a symbol of possibility and a bridge between two worlds. And though challenges still lay ahead, Elira faced them with a clarity and determination that would shape the future of her empire and the life she now carried within her. Elira stood at the grand entrance of the palace, her violet-tinted skin glowing under the soft ceremonial lights and her mind brimming with determination. Months on Earth had changed her in ways that Violia could not have anticipated. She no longer felt the weight of shame that had once dictated every move, every word, every breath. She carried a secret power within her, the life of a child, and with it, the potential to shift the perspectives of an entire empire. The halls of the palace seemed both familiar and alien. The glittering chandeliers reflected the opulence Elira had once taken for granted, yet now she felt above it all. Every whisper she had heard growing up, every judgment passed by the council, every glance of pity or mockery seemed smaller than it had ever been. She was not here to ask for approval. She was here to claim her place as a living, breathing force capable of shaping the future. The first meeting with the Emperor, her father, was tense. He had sent word that he would see her alone, and Elira entered the throne room with the measured steps she had learned on Earth, carrying the poise of a woman who knew her own value. The Emperor's eyes were heavy with concern, tinged with doubt. He had heard the rumors that the princess who had been declared infertile had returned pregnant, carrying the potential for a new generation of Viorlians. "My daughter," the Emperor said, his voice calm but lined with the weight of expectation. "You have returned to us with news that none could have expected. Tell me, how has this happened?" Elira held her head high. "Father, I was not broken. The conclusion of my infertility was drawn from narrow observations made under assumptions that were never tested. On Earth, among humans, I found conditions that allowed my body to adapt and create life. It is not magic. It is understanding, science, and environment combined." The Emperor's face shifted through surprise, pride, and confusion. He had ruled a galaxy with tradition as a foundation, yet here was his daughter presenting undeniable evidence that some rules could be challenged without consequence. "You speak with clarity," he said finally. "Yet the council will demand explanation. There will be those who claim manipulation, deception, even interference by humans. How will you defend yourself?" Elira's response was steady, unwavering. "I will not defend myself from ignorance. I will show them the truth. I am a living example that assumptions can be wrong, that knowledge can surpass tradition. My child will be proof, not of weakness, but of possibility, and I will ensure that our empire learns from this, not punishes it." The days that followed were unlike anything Elira had ever experienced. She was called before the Council of Nobles, a gathering of the most powerful and influential figures in Violia. The whispers began before she even entered the chamber. Some nobles mocked her return, some feared the implications of her pregnancy, and a few looked on with awe, uncertain what to expect. Elira entered with calm determination. She allowed her gaze to meet each member, noting their postures, their subtle expressions, and the tension that hung in the air. She spoke first, explaining her experiences on Earth, her collaboration with humans, and the scientific discoveries that had revealed the true nature of her body. Some council members scoffed, claiming that humans could have interfered, that her body had been manipulated by alien medicine or magic. Elira addressed each accusation with patience, providing evidence and data she had gathered, detailing the experiments, observations, and environmental factors that had allowed her fertility to awaken. "The universe is larger than our traditions," Elira said, her voice ringing clearly in the chamber. "Knowledge is not bound by planets, customs, or hierarchy. We can choose to grow, to learn, and to embrace possibility, or we can cling to assumptions that limit us." "I choose growth." A tense silence followed. The council members had expected humility, fear, or perhaps excuses. Instead, Elira presented truth, logic, and confidence. Her words resonated in subtle ways, challenging long-held beliefs while refusing to disrespect tradition. Slowly, the room began to shift. Some counselors nodded quietly, others sat back, reconsidering their positions. The tension did not disappear, but Elira had made her point. She was no longer a passive figure to be judged. Outside the council chambers, word spread quickly across the empire. Citizens and scientists alike marveled at the story of the infertile princess who had returned carrying life. Many had long assumed that Viorlia's traditions and rigid rules were infallible. Elira's experience challenged that notion. Discussions erupted across streets, forums, and hello communications. Could assumptions be wrong? Could tradition be limiting progress? Could humans, a species often dismissed by Virelians as primitive, hold lessons for their empire? Throughout this turmoil, Daniel remained by her side, though at a distance. He had stayed on Earth, ensuring that Elira's work with human scientists continued smoothly, providing support and counsel remotely. Their bond had evolved into something unspoken but deeply understood: trust, respect, and shared purpose. Elira drew strength from the knowledge that she was not alone, that someone she trusted fully understood her journey and its significance. As the months progressed, the pregnancy advanced. Elira's body continued to adapt to Virelia's environment, demonstrating resilience and strength. Medical teams observed her carefully, both to ensure her safety and to gather further knowledge about human and Virelian physiology. Elira, ever vigilant, maintained autonomy over her decisions, ensuring that the focus remained on learning and understanding rather than spectacle or control. Finally, the day came when the child was to be born. The palace prepared for a delicate operation, blending Virelian medical science with insights gained from Earth. Elira entered the medical chamber with calm confidence, surrounded by trusted doctors, scientists, and a few select members of the council. The process was intense, requiring patience, skill, and care. Elira focused on her breathing, grounding herself in the moment, aware of every sensation, every heartbeat, every movement. Hours passed, and then a new life emerged. The cry of the infant filled the chamber, echoing against the marble walls. Elira felt a wave of emotion unlike anything she had ever known: relief, joy, pride, and wonder all mingled together. She held her child for the first time, marveling at the tiny features, the soft skin, the spark of life that seemed to contain the potential for a new era. The child was a bridge between worlds, part Virelian, part human-influenced adaptation. Scientists observed and recorded data, but Elira was more focused on the wonder of the moment. She whispered softly, feeling a connection that transcended politics, science, and expectation. "Welcome to the world," she said. "You are hope not just for me, but for everything that can change for the better." News of the birth spread quickly throughout the empire. The narrative shifted from scandal to marvel. Citizens and officials alike marveled at the resilience of life, at the courage of a princess who had defied assumptions, and at the potential for collaboration across species. Political rivals, previously eager to exploit weakness, found themselves reconsidering their positions. The empire had witnessed something rare: proof that curiosity, intelligence, and courage could challenge tradition and still preserve dignity. Elira took the opportunity to address her people. From a balcony overlooking the palace grounds, she spoke to the masses, her voice carrying with clarity and strength. She recounted her journey, her experiences on Earth, and the lessons she had learned. She emphasized that knowledge, respect, and adaptability were not signs of weakness but of power. She urged the empire to embrace curiosity, to question assumptions, and to seek understanding rather than cling to fear. Her words resonated across Virelia. Citizens cheered, not just for the princess, but for the message she carried. That life was not bound by tradition, and that potential could be realized when assumptions were challenged. Scientists and thinkers saw new possibilities for collaboration with humans, for expanding understanding of biology, environment, and interstellar culture. Even the emperor, her father, acknowledged that Elira's journey had transformed not only his daughter, but also the empire itself. In private moments, Elira reflected on everything she had experienced. The years of isolation, judgment, and exile had been painful, but they had also prepared her for the responsibilities she now embraced. She thought of Daniel, of the freedom she had found on Earth, and of the trust and courage that had allowed her to grow. And she felt profound gratitude, not only for her child, but for the lessons that had revealed her own strength. The palace that had once felt like a cage now felt like a stage for change. Elira was no longer the infertile princess defined by failure. She was a mother, a scholar, a bridge between worlds, and a symbol of hope. She knew that challenges would continue, that politics and tradition could still oppose her, but she faced them with a clarity and courage born of experience. As the sun set over the capital city, Elira held her child, gazing at the stars that had once seemed so distant and unattainable. She imagined the world she had visited, the knowledge she had gained, and the possibilities that lay ahead. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free. free from judgment, free from limitation, and free to shape her own destiny. The child in her arms stirred, and Elira whispered again, "You are the future. You are proof that life, courage, and understanding can change everything." And in that quiet moment, the empire and the universe beyond seemed full of promise, as though the impossible had become real and hope had been reborn. Elira, once considered broken, had returned not just with life, but with a message that would echo across generations. The strength of individuals, the courage to question, and the power of humanity could reshape the stars themselves. And with that realization, she stepped forward, ready to embrace the future she had fought to claim. A future defined not by fear or limitation, but by curiosity, courage, and boundless possibility.